Another symptom of violations of the don't repeat yourself principle that we see in our code is this repeated if-then logic. In this case, we can see that we're simply checking whether or not the count is a certain value in order to ensure that we are able to write out the value to our table. Let's look at how we can clean this up. So this logic occurs within our transform method, where the first thing that we're doing is grabbing this invoice table and loading it with the values that we want into our freight shipper list. So for each row, we're adding a value. And then we're checking to see if our list has a certain count. We want to go and calculate the freight for that particular entry and specify it here. And then if it is another count of greater than 1 or a count greater than 2, we're going to do this. And you can imagine that if we had dozens and dozens of shippers, we would end up with many, many instances of this particular if-then block. This can be replaced quite easily with a loop. In fact, it could all be done inside the loop that we already have up here, where instead of specifying what we're doing in a separate if block, we can just extract out a method for it and say here that the freight by shipper, well, first we'll pull out the actual entity that we want. So we'll say var my shipper equals, and we'll grab this new value here that we want. And I'm sure there's a refactoring that'll do that for me. And we'll put in my shipper there. And then the only other thing we need to do is say that my shipper dot freight equals calculate freight for shipper, and we'll pass in, what do we need? The name. So my shipper dot shipper name, and as well the invoice table, which we have a reference to. So we'll do this. We'll generate this method. And at this point, we simply copy out the guts of our if-then logic here, paste that into our new method here, and say that we're going to return this calculation here. And we really only need the shipper name at this location here. So that lets us do our computation and eliminates the need for this block. Now we want to write it out. So we want the shipper name as well as the result. And we can just return the result. That allows us to eliminate all of these if checks by doing all that work inside of this one loop, which now is one line of code. So we've reduced our total lines of code significantly. We're taking advantage of a loop that we already had. If we didn't have this loop, we could have simply created our own loop that looped through each of the freight by shipper list entries to do this work as well. But it's very common refactoring to be able to take a number of if statements and replace them with some kind of a loop. And so now we should be able to run this application, and everything still works as it did before.